Fourth talk, delivered by me on December 12, 1930, at a meeting of a newly formed group, to which were again admitted the members of the so-called Orage group. The place was crowded in the extreme. I want, before beginning to expound the quintessence of this fourth talk of mine, to describe, and even if possible with real picturing, several events which took place then among the members of this Orage group, after I proposed to them to sign the receipt obligation mentioned in a previous chapter. I want to describe these events and the different consequences deriving from them, which unexpectedly engendered, even for myself, very profitably arranged circumstances, chiefly because, throwing a real and not a puffing light on it, as is the habit regarding everything American, one might give for the inner sight of every reader a very good picture for the understanding of how strongly is developed in these Americans, considered all over the earth among contemporary people as the most cultured, the feeling which is called herd instinct, which has become an infallible inherency of contemporary people in general, and is manifested in the fact that a man does not guide himself in his acts by his own reasoning, but follows blindly the example of others, and how the degree of development of his mentation, in the sense of his ableness to make logical confrontations, is really of a very low level. I wish also to show that, thanks to these descriptions of mine, there will be elucidated and will become really clear for every reader of my writings, at least that side of the custom existing in the process of our common life, which is spread everywhere, especially among Americans, and consists in that people, in their striving to achieve the same aim, are divided into various so-called parties, which, in my opinion, especially in these last years, have assumed the character of one of the biggest, so to say, plagues of our contemporary common life. These events, which by their content can correspond also to the aim which I put to myself in exposing this series, that is to say, that they might also carry an instructive character, proceeded in the following sequence. After I had announced at the general meeting the indispensability of signing the mentioned obligation, and had set a definite time by which it had to be signed, they almost all in the same evening, as I learned afterwards, divided into separate groups. First walked about the streets, and then, taking themselves off to various nocturnal childses, as they call them, or to the apartments of those whose what is called domestic tyrant, usually in every contemporary household, was on that day absent, discussed and argued excitedly, almost till morning, as to what they should do. On the next day, from the early morning, also meeting and talking by telephone with those of their comrades who had not been present at this general meeting, they continued their exchange of thoughts and opinions, and as a result of all these discussions and deliberations of theirs, there were formed by that same evening 3 independent parties with various attitudes toward everything that had occurred. The first party consisted of those who decided not only to sign the obligation required by me, but also in the future unconditionally to fulfill all kinds of orders and indications issued exclusively only by me personally. The second consisted of those in the psyche of whom, through incomprehensible, at least to my mind, causes, there was formed in this short time, for some reason, a strange factor, bidding their whole peculiar individuality not to recognize anything whatsoever issuing from me, but to remain true to the one who for several years had been for them, as one of them expressed himself, not only a teacher and mentor, but also, as it were, their own loving father. That is to say, Mr. Orage. The third party consisted of those who postponed their decision, awaiting the reply to the telegram they had sent to Mr. Orage asking what they should do. All of those who joined the first party had to the last man signed the obligation before the appointed time was up. In the psyche of those composing the second party, as it subsequently became clear, the mentioned strange factor progressively increased in its force up to the moment when the time appointed for the signing of the obligation had elapsed, and reached such a point that every one of them, in his, so to say, belligerent animation and fury in the fight with me, would have gone a dozen better than the famous ancient Balshakarians, protecting their idol Tansatrata from the devils specially sent to them from hell. And as regards those of my charming, dainty American followers of my ideas, who then made up the third party, it is just they who have shown and proved the degree of contemporary development of the logical mentation of people of their grouping, which is considered in contemporary life everywhere on earth as one of the most civilized. The various shades of complicated, fine, and clever results of manifestation of this logical mentation of theirs then became really evident to all around them, and particularly to me, from the fact that, having received the news of the arrival soon of Mr. Orage himself on the field of action, as he was already on his way, they began to invent all kinds of crafty circumstances, supposedly independent of them, and began to bring these ideally well-invented circumstances of theirs to the attention of my poor secretary, and did this, moreover, not themselves, but through others by telephone. All this they did for the purpose of putting off their final decision until the arrival of Mr. Orage, preparing thus, at all events, a respectable justification for not signing the obligation at the proper time. 2 days before the fourth general meeting of this group reorganized by me on new principles, Mr. Orage himself arrived finally in New York, already informed about everything that had taken place here in his absence. On the very day of his arrival, he requested, through my secretary, a personal interview with me. I confess that I did not expect this because, as it was known to me, many of the members of the group had written to him about all that had happened here, and particularly, of course, about my reiterated, not very flattering opinion of him. At first, I wanted to answer to his request that I could meet him with pleasure as an old friend, but on one express condition: that there would not be any talk about all kinds of misunderstandings, nor of various new statements I had made during his absence, in the presence of people who were members of his group. But all at once, remembering the alarming news received by me 1 hour ago of the bad turn of my material affairs, connected with the liquidation of goods brought by my companions, I decided to delay the answer in order to think it over well, because at the same time, a thought germinated in me. Would it not be possible to use such a request to me for my aims, considering that my prime decision not to utilize the members of this group for the actualization of the purpose of this trip of mine had by this time already been changed in consequence of the manifestations of some of them, manifestations quite intolerable and unworthy of people who had already been for several years in contact with my ideas, especially since it seemed that they had been thinking about them and had understood them well. Thinking over and confronting all kinds of results which might arise in various cases, I decided to answer him through the same secretary of mine as follows. Most calm, most promising, and particularly most esteemed by me, Mr. Orage. After everything that has happened here, as much as you know me, I have no more the right to meet you on the former conditions, even merely as an old friend. Now, without breaking my principles, most of which are known to you, I can meet you, and even, as in the past, occupy myself with the process of pouring from the empty into the void, exclusively if you also, Mr. Orage, will sign the obligation I propose to all the members of the group you have directed. Having received this answer, Mr. Orage, to the great astonishment of the people near me, who had journeyed with me, came at once to that flat of mine where some of the people lived who came with me, among whom was my secretary, and, first of all, without arguing, signed the obligation. Then, evidently copying, as it was related to me, my usual attitude when I am sitting, he began to speak calmly as follows. Knowing well, he said, of course, thanks to Mr. Gurdjieff, the difference between the manifestations of a man engendered by his real nature, which is the pure result of his heredity and education in his childhood, and the manifestations engendered by his automatic mentation, which, as he himself defines it, is a mere result of all kinds of accidental impressions assimilated without any order, and being at the same time well informed by letters, mostly sent to me by various members of the group here, about everything that has taken place here in my absence, I at once understood without any doubt whatsoever what was hidden behind the proposal made to me by Mr. Gurdjieff, which at first glance seemed really absurd. A proposal to me to sign also, like the others, the obligation which would deprive me of the right to have any relationship, not only with the members of that group which I had directed for such a long time, but, however strange it may sound, even with myself. I understood it at once, obviously because during these last days I meditated very much regarding the lack of correspondence between my inner conviction and what Mr. Gurdjieff calls my playing a role here, and the heavy, unpleasant feeling created in me by the sincere cognition of that lack always increased more and more. In my moments of a quiet state, especially during the last year, I often confessed innerly with sincerity the contradiction of my outer manifestations with the ideas of Mr. Gurdjieff, and therefore the maleficence of my verbal influence on people whom I guided, so to say, in accordance with his ideas. Frankly speaking, almost all the impressions received from what Mr. Gurdjieff has said, here in the general meetings and to individual members of our group about me and my activity, exactly correspond to my inner conviction. Many times did I intend myself to put a stop to such a double manifestation of myself, but various life circumstances constantly prevented me from setting out to do so with the requisite decisiveness. Having received from him now, he continued, at first glance an absurd proposal, but knowing the habit of my teacher always to keep deep thoughts under ordinary, so to say, meaningless outer expressions, I, having thought only a moment, clearly understood that if I do not profit from the opportunity to rid myself now forever of such, as I should say, double dealing of mine, I should never be able to do it again. I decided therefore to begin by signing the obligation required by Mr. Gurdjieff, and at the same time I give my word in your presence that from this moment on I shall not have any further communication either with any members of the former group or even with my former self, on the grounds of the former conditions of mutual relations and influences. I wish very much, of course, if Mr. Gurdjieff permits, to become from this day an ordinary member of this now reorganized new group. Such a philosophizing of Mr. Orage made such a strong impression on me, and produced such a strange reaction in my peculiar psyche, that now, even with the strongest desire, I cannot refrain from relating this and describing in the style of my former teacher, now almost a saint, Mullah Nasr ad-Din, the surroundings and the conditions in which proceeded the process of assimilation in my being of the, so to say, zimis, of the above-mentioned philosophizing of my dear Anglo-American delicatesse, Mr. Orage, who was, during many years in America, almost the chief representative and interpreter of my ideas. When they told me of his having come and of his philosophizing concerning the proposal I made him, and his decision also to sign this obligation, I was in the kitchen, preparing the, so to say, gravity-centered dish, as it is called by my drones, which I did every day during my stay in New York for the purpose chiefly of having some physical exercise, devoting each day, moreover, to the preparation of a new national dish of some one of the peoples inhabiting all continents. That day I was preparing the favorite dish of the people inhabiting the space between China and Russian Turkestan. At the moment when there was reported to me the arrival of Mr. Orage and his fine philosophical deliberations, I was beating the yolks of eggs with cinnamon and pompadori. And when the outer sounding of certain of the sentences used by him began to be perceived in me, nobody knows why, right in the center between the two hemispheres of the brain, in all that totality of the functioning of my organism which in general engenders in man feeling, there gradually began a process similar to the experiencing of a feeling called a touchy emotion. And I suddenly, without any consideration, instead of a pinch of ginger, dumped into the casserole with the left hand the whole supply in the kitchen of powdered cayenne pepper, an action which is not at all proper to me during such a for me, sacred ritual as the composition and preparation for obtaining a corresponding symphonic taste of some dish which has existed on the earth since olden times. And swinging my right arm in rhythm with all my force, dealt a blow on the back to my poor secretary of music, who was there in the kitchen washing dishes, and then flung myself into my room, fell on the sofa, and, burying my head in the cushions, which, by the way, were half moth-eaten, began to sob with bitter tears. I began to sob, of course, with no reasonable motive, but only seized by the fully possessing me, and by inertia continuing, mentioned feeling of emotion, until my friend the doctor, who had accompanied me to America, having by chance noticed the beginning of a psychic state as yet unknown to him, came into the room with a big bottle of Scotch whiskey, specially made for Americans. After I had swallowed this medical remedy of his, though physically I calmed down a little, the twitching which had begun in the left half of my body continued until supper time, namely until the moment when I and all the people who were with me were compelled, for lack of any other food, to eat the dish I had so immoderately peppered. What experience began in me and what results settled in my consciousness from the associations proceeding in my mentation, thanks to this immoderately peppered dish, I shall not describe in this place of my writings, because the idea has just arisen in me of making this information the issuing basis for a certain highly edifyingly instructive question on the psyche of contemporary man, born and bred on the continent of Europe, which I propose to elucidate from every aspect in one of the following books of this third series of my writings. Regarding how I utilized for my, in the objective sense, equitable aims, the manifestations in the given case of the mentation developed to the highest degree of contemporary civilization, of these, so to say, representatives of Americans. This will be shown by the following. When, on the day after Mr. Oraj's visit, I began to receive from early hours in the morning numerous requests from his adepts, almost entreating me to enroll them as members of this new group, I gave the order to answer all of them as follows. To the next general meeting of the newly organized group, any former member of the Oraj group can be admitted on the two following conditions. The first condition is to pay a fine for not having signed the obligation in time, of a sum of dollars corresponding to the material possibilities of the given person, which will be established by a committee, specially chosen for this purpose, of several members of the former group. The second condition is that all those who have fulfilled the first condition, that is, the immediate payment of the fine imposed on them, which will not in any circumstances be returned, will be enrolled for the time being only as candidates for the new group. And only after a certain established term will it be decided, depending on the fulfillment or non-fulfillment by them of subsequent conditions, who is worthy to remain in the group as a full member and who is unconditionally to leave the group. On the same day, a committee was formed by my choice of 4 members who, together with me, established 7 gradations of fines. The first and highest fine was fixed at the sum of $3,648. The second at $1,824. The third at $912. The fourth at $456. The fifth at $228. The sixth at $114. And the last and lowest at $57. To the sum total of these fines were added the charges which I fixed for shorthand copies of the talks I delivered at the first 3 meetings of the new exoteric group to those who had been absent, indispensable for the understanding of my subsequent talks, from the first group, that is to say, those who unconditionally signed the obligation. $10 from those who belonged to the second group, that is to say, who did not recognize anything whatsoever issuing from me, $40. And those who had belonged to the third group, that is, those who decided to await the arrival of Mr. Orage, $20. All that made a total of $113,000, which sum I divided into 2 equal parts, one of which I kept myself, and the other for the beginning of the formation of a fund for mutual aid to the materially needy members of this first exoteric group organized by me. A group for collective self-perfecting with a program drawn up already in exact accordance with my ideas. Thus, my delivery of the said fourth talk, the summarized contents of which I now wish to cite, took place this time in the presence of Mr. Orage himself, and of several of his former, so to say, first-rank defenders, now sitting, of course, with tails between their legs, and facial expressions of unchangeable plasto-oleaginous traits. That evening, after the demonstration of the music usually composed the day before and after the performance, according to the established custom, by my Secretary of Music, and at my choice and wish of the majority present, of 2 pieces of the former series of my music, I began thus. According to all kinds of historical data, and to sane, logical human mentation, man, as compared to other external forms of life arising and existing on earth, both by bodily organization as well as the degree of complexity of the form of functioning of his psyche for every kind of perceiving and manifestation, ought to be, among these other external forms of life, really supreme, and so to say directive in respect of regulating the correctness of ordinary life, as well as in respect of giving indications for the worthy justifications of the sense and aim of his existence in the process of the actualization of what is foreordained by our common Father. In the general process of the variform life on the earth, as these same historical data show us, it was thus at the beginning, and only afterwards when there arose in the psyche of people, chiefly owing to their vice called laziness, and with each generation there began to increase in the intensity of its actions on their common presence, that something which automatically enjoins this common presence of theirs, constantly to desire and to strive to attain peace. From then on, with the increasing in man of the intensity of the action of this fundamental evil of theirs, there began proportionately also to increase their removal from the general life proceeding on earth. As the correctness of the functioning proceeding in us of any relatively independent organ depends on the correctness of the tempo of the general functioning of the whole organism, so also the correctness of our life depends on the correctness of the automatic life of all the other external forms of life arising and existing together with us on our planet. As the general tempo of life on the earth engendered by the cosmic laws consists of the totality of all the tempos both of our human life and also of all the other external forms of life, therefore the abnormalities of the tempo of any one form of life, or even only the disharmony, must inevitably evoke abnormality and disharmony in another form of life. I began to speak about such an abstract theme, at first glance distant from the one put by me for your immediate interest, chiefly because, wishing today to explain to you the method of one, so to say, cardinal exercise for the conscious crystallization in you of the first of the 7 psychic data, inherent only in man, I wish to give you the information about such an aspect of the objective truth, for the precise and broad understanding of which it is indispensable to make such a digression of general character. I consider it important and for you very useful to note that such an aspect of objective truth in the process of human life was always, since ancient times on earth, one of the fundamental secrets of initiates of all epochs and ranks. And the knowledge of it, as it is already established, might contribute by itself to increase the intensity of assimilation of the results deriving from this first, as well as other similar exercises. I wish to explain to you just about that totality of cosmic substances and properties inherent to the totality which, not only in our human life, but also in the other external forms of life, is the chief actualizing factor, and which, being the second substantial food, is nothing other than the air we breathe. The air, from which are eliminated the elements necessary for our life, to be transformed afterwards in our organism into other cosmic substances for the needs of the general universal actualization. Like every definite cosmic concentration, is composed of 2 kinds of active elements with 2 properties, quite contradictory in their totality. One kind of active element has a subjective process of evolutionary striving, and the other of involutionary. The air, like every definite cosmic concentration, formed owing to all kinds of common cosmic laws, and to various ensuing secondary laws, depending upon the position and the reciprocal action, as in the given case of our planet, with the other large cosmic concentrations of the totality of substances, acquires and possesses a multitude of specific particularities. From among this multitude of particularities, we, for the present case, must know about that one which since long ago has in the process of human life always been one of the chief secrets of all ranks of initiates of all epochs. This particularity is that